Hello, I'm Richard Sher, and welcome to Square Off. Let's meet this week's panel. She is a GOP National Committee woman, the amazing Nicolee Ambrose, Mr. Politics, Hassan, Giordano, and two of our favorite attorneys, Dick Gelfman and Bob Scherr. Breaking this week, the hush money trial for former President Donald Trump is scheduled to begin Monday morning in New York. Trump will become the first ever former president to face criminal charges. Trump also faces felony charges in 3 other criminal cases. Bob Scherr, you're the captain today. Go ahead.
Of all the trials that are pending against Donald Trump, this is the weakest and probably will be the only one that will be tried prior to the election. It's amazing. What I find amazing about it is Michael Cohen pled guilty. He wasn't convicted. He pled guilty and got 3 years of jail time. If Trump is convicted, it's the kind of case where it's a financial, misappropriation of finances during a campaign. It's a probation case. So of all the trials, this is the least one. If you're against Trump, this is not the one you wanted. There were others that should have come first.
You know, there was a journalist up in New York somewhere that wrote some article on all the other similar cases that were brought for these kinds of business activities and things, and what the average sentence was. Because some people were saying it could be as much as a year or 4 years on each count. Others were saying it's got to be probation. Anyway, this journalist wrote the article basically saying 90% of the judges did probation and maybe did, at most. He found, I think, 1 or 2 cases that there was actual jail time. But the question, an interesting question would be, what if the judge, to make a record after a conviction, if there were a conviction, were to sentence him? What happens? The Secret Service go to jail with him?
Yes.
I mean, what happens in that kind of a situation?
Well, I think the larger question is a former president getting convicted at all, regardless of the sentence, whether it's probation or 5 years in jail. The fact that he gets convicted of anything should go to show to the country that this probably isn't the best person best suited to serve as your next president of the United States. And so the question then begs the question of, if he does become the Republican nominee, which it appears, and he wins in November before he goes back to trial for any of the other pending matters, do they just all of a sudden disappear for the next 4 years? And I think the majority of the American people would think that that's politics as usual. But I'm sure his base would choose to say otherwise.
Nicolee Ambrose, you have a little smirk on your face. What do you think?
I think Bob gave a great legal analysis of this being such a weak case, but specifically, I think the Democrats have completely overplayed their lawfare game to the point that most people in America feel like they have overplayed their hands, and I think it's actually making Trump stronger with the general electorate. But specifically in this New York case, the judge's daughter has raised over $90 million on this case for a Democrat-affiliated firm, purely playing politics on this issue. That is why the Trump campaign or Trump team has repeatedly asked that the judge be recused in this case. He refuses. But it's yet another reason why Americans look at this case and all the other cases and say, this is nonsense. Like, this shouldn't happen to any American. And when they so overplay their hand, judges won't recuse themselves. And, family members are raising $90 million off of a case that another family member is presiding over. It just stinks to high heaven.
Here's a question for Bob. Wait, Bob and Dick. The task at hand, if everything goes as scheduled, is to select, imagine, 12 jurors from an initial poll, a pool of 500 New Yorkers who can be trusted to judge the former president fairly. How can you pick an unbiased juror who has not heard everything there is to know about Donald Trump?
You know,
All they can do, you can't try this case in another state because they're going to know him regardless of what state he's tried in. So that is a problem in jury selection. But what the judge will ask is there anyone, the fact you know who he is, can you still render a fair and impartial verdict? If the answer is yes, he stays. If the answer is no, he's knocked off the jury. So that's the key question. Yes, they know who he is. Yes, they've read things about it, but the judge will focus in on whether, despite all that, you can be open-minded and still render a fair and impartial verdict based not on what you've heard, but based on the evidence presented at trial. That's
One of the-
I'll tell you, the opposite side of that too is if you found somebody that said, no, I've heard nothing about it. I have no idea whatsoever. That person is so under a rock that they obviously ought to be disqualified for other reasons. You know, I mean, it's like, no, it really, can you imagine somebody is there a person in the world who hasn't heard of this controversy and know Donald Trump and what's going on? Of course not. And if they say, oh no, I have no idea what's going on, that's a strange person that shouldn't be sitting on a jury.
Well, the bigger question is, how do you trust as the attorney and or the judges on both the attorneys on both sides of the judge,
right,
the people who you're asking this question to? Because of course they're going to say, oh, of course not, especially if they're trying to get on this jury because they're looking at the future book deals and the media attention they'll get. So they're going to say, oh, sure, I can be impartial. Sure, I won't let any of that. How do you, as an attorney or the judges, kind of sway through the BS, so to speak, from these individuals?
You know, you have to take them at their word because you have that in every jury. I mean, jurors can lie on these questions. So you got to take them at their word. But I'll tell you, this is not the kind of case necessarily that you want to sit on. I get what you're saying, Hassan. You know, there's books to be written, money to be made if you're on the jury. I get that. But there's also, if you convict Donald Trump, you got to worry about, regardless of what side you're on, you got to worry about people coming after you. So there's a danger on sitting on this jury.
Is the retribution.
Yeah.
Nick, say it.
Which part?
Go ahead.
I think Hassan made a really great point, actually. And, you know, gosh, in a Democrat-controlled state like New York, I obviously think, to Bob's point, for retribution, you have to worry about what the kind of limitless, lawless Democrat judicial system will do to you. I think there's no better proof than what these cases against Trump. Of all of the cases, the case I was most worried about was the other case involving that 1950 statute, which had been used to prosecute people who overcharged for refrigerators, being used to try to take away Trump's entire business empire. And although it was a civil case, to me, of all the cases ongoing against Trump, that was the most disturbing to me because it kind of most undermined the American dream and your ability to build your own business and that the government could take it away on a whim. So that of all the New York cases and all the cases in America, that was actually the case that concerned me the most. I agree that this case is just a joke, but once again, it will be fascinating to see how jury selection goes in it.
This is a campaign. This is a campaign.
Hold it, Bob. Trump faces 34 felony charges. The indictment accuses Trump of lying on financial documents by fraudulently disguising hush money payments as legal expenses in violation of state law. Final question here. What if you get a Trumper who sneaks through the cracks? It only takes one to have a mistrial, right? Is that true?
That's true in any trial. It's only on it when you've got 12 people sitting in a box, then they're probably going to have four alternates probably. So you got a jury of 12 plus 4 alternates that could be used just in case. And any one of the 12, the initial 12 that are actually sitting, I'll tell you, if they come in and they say, no, I'm just not, just this much, I'm not, just a little bit, I'm not convinced. That's enough to make the whole jury not convinced in terms of a verdict. And
It'll be interesting because I think if he's convicted, his poll numbers are going to go up. They're not going to go down. This is a campaign finance violation. Okay. It doesn't belong in the criminal court. It's a probation case. And perfect example, the civil case with E. Jean Carroll was more serious. I mean, we were talking about sexual offenses in that case, and that should have hurt him more than this campaign finance. The E. Jean Carroll case, his poll numbers went up. So believe me, they're not going to go down on a campaign finance violation.
We have some poll numbers in the mayor's race in Baltimore, and we'll get to those in just a moment. Right now, let's introduce the voice of Squirrel, who has now won Emmys, Grammys, and Oscars. Howard Mallison. Go ahead, Howard.
And I want to show everybody my trophies. You know, Richard and I are proud to represent the law firm of Barry Glazer. Barry always goes the extra mile for his clients, whether it's been a personal injury, medical malpractice, or nursing home neglect. Barry and his staff, that includes an in-house doctor, make no apologies for getting top dollar from the insurance companies. His clients are his best advertising. So next time you need a lawyer, give Barry Glazer a call at 410-547-8568. He gets results. And tell him Richard Sher sent you. Right, Rich?
All right, absolutely. Absolutely.
For special occasions, group get-togethers, or just a date night, Pappas restaurants and sports bars belong on the top of your list. Enjoy their award-winning crab cake, or as Richard calls it, Rich?
Fab cakes. They are
Fab cake.
Yep. You don't go to your mouth to take out the shells. It's fabulous.
And a great selection of steaks, seafoods, and other mouth-watering treats. Pappas is Oprah's favorite. They ship their crab cakes all over the country, 4 locations, including their newest sports bar and restaurant in Bel Air. Pappas' food, service, and atmosphere is second to none. Back to you, Richard.
Well, now you'll remember, perhaps, thanks, Al. On last week's Square Off, we were talking about the rift between City State's Attorney Ivan Bates and the mayor of the city, Brandon Scott. And guess what happened during the week? The panel, well, we discussed the rift last week, and this week, State's Attorney Ivan Bates endorsed former Mayor Sheila Dixon. Maryland's U.S. Senators Ben Cardin and Chris Van Hollen came out in support of Brandon Scott's run for re-election. And we'll have some new numbers in that race. Hassan, what are your thoughts?
Well, look, I think overall understanding the dynamic that's been occurring from the state's attorney's office and the mayor's office by being there, being on the front lines of that, understanding that it's just been a philosophical difference on how you approach public safety between the state's attorney, who, by the way, in the latest polling is 69% approval rating, higher than every politician in the city, by the way, over that of Mayor Scott, whose police commander or commissioner, as well as his Monzi mayor's office of neighborhood and safety engagement, has yet to really engage with the citation docket put forth by the state's attorney to hold offenders accountable who do quality of life crimes. That's the biggest rift that came out of it. And I think it's just been a boiling point from last year to now that led the state's attorney to make the endorsement of former Mayor Sheila Dixon, who, if you look back at her time as mayor, had historic lows across the board when it came to the reduction of homicides, violent crime, as well as quality of life crimes. She has been very supportive of the citation docket and going after quality of life crimes and doing it as a holistic approach. So I think the state's attorney just felt as if, you know, they were more aligned philosophically on how to attack crime than how he was with them.
Bob, come in.
Without endorsing anyone, talking about myself, I do want to acknowledge, though, that I believe that crime is out of control. That's number one. Number two, it is the number one issue. It always in Baltimore City is the number one issue. And it is very important that all crime fighters, elected politicians, when it comes to fighting crime in Baltimore City, must be on the same page. We have seen what a mayor and state's attorney who are not on the same page look like. And I'm talking about Martin O'Malley and Patricia Jessamy when she was state's attorney. They butted heads and crime went out of control even worse. So we've got to have somebody, and I'm not saying necessarily that it's one or the other, but if Ivan Bates is state's attorney, he's going to remain state's attorney regardless of who the next mayor is. Bates still remains state's attorney, and he's the #1 crime fighter. So Mayor Scott has got to get on the same page to be effective in fighting crime. Whoever the mayor is must be on the same page. They cannot be butting heads with crime out of control in Baltimore.
Regardless of what the mayor wants in terms of not necessarily agreeing with quality of life crime, citation kind of stuff, regardless of what the mayor wants, Ivan Bates is the prosecutor. It's his decision, isn't it, whether or not those crimes, whether a prosecutor will take that to court or whether they'll say, thank you, nice seeing you, goodbye.
Look at Marilyn Mosby. She's a perfect example of what you just said, Vic.
Well, the problem is this, Vic, is that with the citation docket in particular, going after these quality of life crimes, you need the officers, BPD, to one, start writing the citations. Out of the 333 citations we've had thus far through the end of last year, only 35 of those came from BPD. 79 of the BPD citations were thrown out for insufficiency by their own legal review unit. Whereas though you have MTA, Morgan State Police, some of the smaller agencies writing more citations than BPD, which is the largest of all the law enforcement agencies. So it never even makes it to court because they can't seem to get it right. And then the wraparound services that were supposed to be provided by Monzi, they never even signed the MOU until yesterday. So that's a 9-10 month gap.
MOUSE, Mickey Mouse. Nicolee.
All right, a few things here. So number one, I kind of think this is a contest between people who actually live in and know Baltimore versus people outside of Baltimore, which somehow think someone like Brandon Scott in this case is going to carry their water for them, although they don't have to deal with the repercussions of his actions, right? So you've got Ivan Bates, who's done a brilliant job, by all accounts, getting crime more under control in the city, and a mayor who's not exactly his partner in that, but is trying to claim credit for it. And you have essentially Baltimoreans like me who feel like finally we're going in the right direction, and the only one who's not on this train is the mayor. And it's really obvious when you live in Baltimore City that the police don't feel the mayor has their back. And so why are they going to go and risk their lives when they could be thrown under the bus at any moment in time? And there's still obviously a lot more work to be done to get crime under control, but it needs all the partners in that equation pitching in and making sure there's cause and effect for when you commit crime in the city. And as a taxpaying citizen, I would love to feel even safer in the city.
Let me say that according to new numbers now from Goucher College and the Baltimore Banner, incumbent mayor Brandon Scott has now gained ground over former Mayor Sheila Dixon. 40% for Scott, 32% for Dixon, 11% for Tharu Vignaraja, 3% for businessman Bob Wallace. Who can offer an explanation of why Brandon's numbers went up in this poll?
Well, let me tell you something. First of all, polls are like buttholes. Everybody has them and they all stink. All right. And so I would take that with a grain of salt, to be quite honest.
Minute. Was that from William Shakespeare's
Sonnet? Absolutely. I'm glad you remember that one. Absolutely.
Sonic? That was Sonic number 2. Go on.
Absolutely. No, but no, in all seriousness, for every former Mayor Dixon has led in every poll since last year when she was up by 11 points to even recent ones that were up by 4. And I still didn't take it with a grain of salt because at the end of the day, the only poll that matters is election night, right? Brandon Scott was down 10 points in the last election and he actually came back and won the race. So again, this poll in particular was not in a direct poll based on the election. It was a poll based on state review and how they handled Francis Scott Key. The very last question was, oh, and by the way, after I told you how great Brandon Scott did with the governor and the U.S. senators on the Francis Scott Key Bridge scandal, by the way, would you vote for him or Sheila Dixon for mayor or the rest of the candidate? So it wasn't a poll based on looking at who you would prefer for mayor. It was just thrown in there as a question at the last minute. That's more of a push poll than it is anything.
And can I, to that topic, can I actually go off on this for a second? So I hear a lot from folks around the nation, and everyone's like, what's going on in Baltimore? How come this could even happen? You know, in other ports, there's underwater guides that would keep a ship from crashing into such a major infrastructure point like a bridge like that. Normally tugboats, it would be protocol to escort, have tugboats escort cargo ships like that past such a sensitive infrastructure point. Why is it that every single time Brandon Scott and Governor Westmore go on TV, it's just this media love fest of how fantastic they are? Instead, no one is asking the critical questions that this should never have happened. So obviously, I think the mayor and the governor are trying to use this to inflate their national standing. But to me, if you just simply ask some basic questions that any member of the media should, you would come up with a different characterization of the situation.
All right, Nicolee, we allowed you to go off on that. That's very good. Very interesting. We're going to come back, talk about the race for Ben Cardin's seat in the Senate. But first, here again is the voice of Squirrel, Howard.
Thank you, Richard. You know, the way some people drive these days, auto accidents are on the rise. If your car's been in an accident, the insurance companies can't tell you where to take your car. That's why more and more people are trusting their auto repairs and auto maintenance to the leading edge auto body and mechanical repair company. They work on all makes and models, and they offer free pickup and delivery anywhere in the Baltimore area. Give them a call at 410-433-6433 or visit them at 5807 Falls Road in the heart of Mount Washington. They make your car look and run like new again. Richard, is that right?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Jeff C on his gang, unbelievable. Tom, trust me. Trust me. If you have a problem, call me personally. All right, go on.
Baltimore is one of the best diner towns in the country, and the most popular of all are the Double T diners. TT means totally terrific. For breakfast, lunch, or dinner, the Double T menu offers you so many choices, you'll want to order everything. With locations on Route 40 West, Perry Hall, White Marsh, Annapolis, Pasadena, and the EC Diner in Ellicott City. Plus, Monday nights are lobster nights at By the Docks in Middle River, all part of the Double T family. Back to you, Richard.
They are fabulous. Lobster night is terrific. Now to the race. We're only going to spend a few minutes on this because we want to talk about O.J. Simpson also. In the race for replacing retiring Senator, our buddy Ben Cardin, a Washington Post, University of Maryland survey shows that Republican Larry Hogan is leading both Democrats, Representative David Trone, 49 to 37%, and PG County Executive Angela Brooks, 50 to 36%. Nicolee, is this going to be a Hogan win in the general?
You know, obviously the polling looks great for Governor Hogan, but this really gets to the point of the op-ed I wrote in the Baltimore Sun this week, with whether it's the Senate race in the general or whether it's the Baltimore City mayor's race in the primary and the Democratic primary for Senate. These numbers are going to look very differently depending on if there's any games with our mail-in ballots, that anyone can order any of our ballots and have it sent to a different address or faxed to a different number. And I think that could affect both the primary and the general. I think these numbers could look very different, and it's really incumbent upon the State Board of Elections to actually make sure we have clean voter rolls so we can be more assured of the process.
All right.
Now, Larry Hogan this race is going to be very, very interesting, and his future I think number one, he's going to win. And number two, he's going to be one of the most important senators in the country. First of all, the interesting thing is Republicans don't like Larry Hogan. It's the Democrats that like him, but Republicans, of course, are going to support him because him winning gives Maryland a Republican for the first time in many years towards getting the majority in the Senate of Republicans. But the reason he's going to be important when he wins is the same reason Joe Manchin is a very important senator in the country now, because he's going to be not a typical Republican. Everybody is going to cater to Larry Hogan as a senator like they do to Joe Manchin as a senator, because he can switch votes and not follow party lines. It's going to be very important, and he's going to win.
All right, let's hold it for a minute because we want to talk about late in the week, the death of O.J. Simpson, who'd been battling prostate cancer. He was 76. The trial captivated the nation. As you know, everybody watched it. It was billed as the trial of the century. Simpson was acquitted in 95 in the murders of his ex-wife, Nicole Brown, and her friend, Ron Goldman. And although Simpson was acquitted of the criminal charges, in 1996, a civil court found him guilty of their murders and ordered him to pay more than $30 million to the victims' families. Very little of that was paid. Dick, what do you think about OJ as you look back on that?
Well, I mean, it was it was obviously a terrible family tragedy, whatever reason you assign to it, whether, OJ, there were so many things after him co-writing the book, that hinted maybe he did it, and then the appearances, and then the later robbery. I mean, it's been one family tragedy on it. What I still when I was watching this last night as they were rehashing it, when I looked at the Bronco driving, and my attention was not on the Bronco, it's on all the people waving. I mean, when this was going on at that particular time, I think the public opinion was, boy, they got him. I mean, he's saying, I'm going to end this, and he's going on and on about it. Why are people out there holding signs saying, you go get him, OJ? It just said more to me about other people than it said about OJ forever. I mean,
Same thing with Donald Trump. Same thing with Trump. He represents, OJ represented something to people. A two-tier system of that he was charged with this and so forth. Donald Trump, he commits what he commits, and he's got a group of supporters, and they don't care what he does. They're not going to find him guilty.
Well, look,
they may in New York, but in a lot of other cases, they won't.
If it doesn't fit, you must acquit. And you're right, Bob. O.J. Simpson, let's not forget, was a Hall of Fame football player, was beloved within the Black African-American community. And Black people, to be quite honest, have a very negative view of the criminal justice system. So they felt, as time went on and you saw Marsha Clark and all this, the wranglings of the prosecution, they felt like he was being set up. And then you have a Johnny Cochran who's kind of motivating that as the attorney. You saw a Black America, and they're just like you saw with Rodney King, with the beating of Rodney King. This all came out, and that's the real perception of Black people.
He was acquitted. That's why he was acquitted with overwhelming evidence supporting his guilt.
Nobody, look, even Black people today will tell you, yeah, I thought he did it, but and so, but then he was charged later on with a whole different crime, served time in jail because of it. But nonetheless, he still is beloved within the Black community, especially of being who he was prior to all of that.
All right, well, listen, Jackson is up here now, Jackson Holiday. So we welcome him to Baltimore. He's going to be a great star for the Orioles. And Howard and I want to tell you, last week I ran some offers. We're looking for some new panelists, not replacing panelists, but some new fresh blood.
We're having a problem with your with your computer, Richard, but I'll mention it. Hello. Hello.
Richard froze, I think.
Something happened there. We have some kind of technical something technically went out, but yeah, Richard, I want to mention that we had a tremendous amount of people who did respond,
Hey,
and I'll mention some of them who, in fact, one of them, Marty Gulcher, who's a political activist, is going to be on the show next week. Nicole Hansen, who's a criminal justice expert, also is going to be on our future shows. Dana Moore, who's Baltimore City's first chief equity officer, she responded. We had a lot of responses, and we still have room for others. It has not anything to do with replacing who's on the show now. We just want to add to give other people an opportunity to be on Square
well,
Off.
we're having some technical difficulties. Thanks for joining us, Nick, Dick, Hassan, and Bob. We'll see you again next week.